All right, last week we started something, and truth be told, we could probably continue this for quite a while. And it's going to be our study on identity. And as it looks right now, we're going to be doing this for the next several months. And one of the things that was a key takeaway for our lesson last week is that identity is who God says I am. Identity is who God says I am. It's not how I feel. It's not what I've done. It's not what's been done to me. Identity is who God says I am. And we started out, and I've lost my eraser. There's the eraser. I'll say I don't have an eraser for this today. We had a couple of frameworks that we put up here, and this was one of the things I think I encouraged you to consider. Which framework do you subscribe to, right? Now, the right order is identity leads to self-worth. Self-worth leads to self-image. And self-image leads to the behaviors that we express. That's how it should be. The wrong order, I'm going to put a plus up here and I'll put a minus down here. And this is where I think a lot of us find ourselves too often. I'm in that line towards the front, okay? Right? But it's our performance leads to our self-esteem. Esteem. Our self-esteem leads to our self-worth. And our self-worth becomes our identity. And sometimes when we have a rough go of things, we can get to feeling really bad about ourselves. Now, I hope none of you have any idea what I'm talking about, but I'm reasonably sure every one of you do. I'm reasonably sure on that. And what happens is when we find ourselves in this model, what we do is we find ourselves trying to perform our way into some identity. We find ourselves trying to do that. But God designed it this way, that we need to recognize and understand that identity comes first. And when we have that identity, everything else flows from it. So I have a question to start with today. If you could go back in your life and you could edit or remove one thing, if you had a time machine, you could go back, you could change one thing. You could change one experience, you could change one failure, you could change one weakness. If you could change one part of how you're wired, would you do it? And the second would be, what would you do? Right? And you don't have to answer that out loud, right? I just want you to think about it. If you could change one thing, what would you change? And I suspect that, many of us maybe can come up with more than one thing that we would put on that list. And I suspect that most of you probably already have had something come to mind. That would be my suspicion. But the question I want to give you today, especially in the context of our study of identity, is what if that thing that you would remove, what if that is something that God is using? What if? And that can make us feel a little uncomfortable. That may be just a little unpleasant. Last week we talked about identity comes from God, but this week we need to go a little bit deeper, and we need to ask ourselves this question: can I actually trust how God made me? Can I trust how God made me and what I've lived through? And I don't know about you, but that can feel a little uncomfortable. That can be a little uncomfortable. So I want to go back. We're moving right along in our Bibles. If you would, turn with me to Genesis chapter 1. That's a joke. You're supposed to laugh. There we go. Thank you. Right? We're going to read the same verse that we read last week. And it's, and I didn't have any of this stuff written up here, but it's Genesis 1, 26 through 28. Same scriptures that we had last week, where it says, Then God said, Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over the livestock and all the wild animals and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them and said to them, Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Now, what I want you to take from that is when God made man, it wasn't reactive. It wasn't random. When God made man, that was a purposeful, intentional decision. And I want you to personalize that this morning, and that God didn't make you as a reaction. He didn't make you by random, on random. My wife gets all randomly. Hey, thank you. I appreciate it. First day with the English language, right? My wife gets all upset with, what is it? By accident, on purpose, by purpose. Well, I don't know. Like kids have all sorts of expressions. And well, you know, it was by accident, or it was however that was. So I'm screwing that up. God was not having a bad day when he made you. Truth be told, I think he was probably having a pretty good day. I think he was having a pretty good day when he made you. He chose to make you. Now, if that's true, then what we're reading here is not new information, but it's a deeper explanation of what God is already doing. Now, I want to invite you, if you would, turn to Psalm 139. Maybe turn to Psalm 139. 13 through 16 is what we want to look at. And I suspect if you've been around the church for some amount of time, you've probably heard this passage before. But David writes, he says, For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. David writes that God made us. He formed us. And he uses the language, he knitted us together. And so today is my youngest daughter, Taryn's birthday. She turned 16 today. If you see her, wish her happy birthday. But you need to know that she is fast becoming a grandmother. Any given evening, she is satisfied to sit down and put a puzzle together. She now has become an avid crocheter. She has a bag with yarn, and I'm sure there's the sticks that you use. I don't know. I'm sure there's something. And she'll sit there and she'll do she's doing really neat things. But just that language, and I know it's not knitting. I think it's crocheting. And for those of you that know the difference, you know that somehow interchanging the terms is offensive, and that's not my intent to do. I accidentally do it, but it's not my intent. And so when you sit and when you do that, you have to be intentional. Like it's not some assembly line. It's not, you weren't thrown together. There was, the language that David uses here is the language of a craftsman or an artist, right? There's a difference between an artisan and an artist. An artisan mass produces art, but an artist makes these works of art. The language that David uses here, it talks about intention. It talks about detail. There's a great deal of care that comes through in this passage. God just didn't put you together. He formed you. And it says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And fearfully is not talking about being afraid, but it's talking about the reverence. It's talking about the intentionality that went in to how he was formed and how each one of us was formed. Have you taken a moment just to think about how God intentionally made you? I don't know that I have, or if I have, I know I don't do it enough. I know I don't do it enough. But what I want you to take from this is that there was nothing casual about God creating you. Nothing of that was casual. Not your wiring, not your personality. Now, some of you have bad personalities. I've talked to some of you. Right? But that God gave you your personality. Now, we're gonna look that just because that's what he gave to you, it doesn't mean that's what you have to stick with. We're going to see that before we're all done. But you know, we have tendencies. Some of us stutter, right? Some of us have tendencies that drive other people crazy, or at least so you're told. But what I want you to take from this is that there's times when there's things that we see about ourselves that we may want to describe as a problem. Now, I don't know if I've shared this with you before. You may have to close your eyes, bite your lip, whatever. Do not point as I tell this story. But when I was in fourth grade, I was taking a different math class. I was moved from the fourth grade math class into a different math class. There was older kids in the class, and the older kids didn't like me because I was a younger kid. And it was easy to make fun of me whenever I was in fourth grade because I'm this goofy looking kid with giant ears. I still have giant ears. Do not point. Close your eyes if this gets uncomfortable. Sarah, you can open your eyes, Sarah. I love you. Come on. I'm just giving you a hard time. I can't see that far. But like that's the way it was. Right? You know, and at the time it was like, oh my goodness, if I didn't have these big ears, like everybody would like me. Well, I think part of it is that that's not exactly true, right? There's things that we have in our lives. There's things that we see in ourselves that maybe we don't like. Maybe we don't like, right? And we can look at these things as problems. There's things that we struggle with. There's things that we wish were different. There's things that we feel, well, these are limitations. These are things that hold us back. But I want you to know there's some of the things that we have that need to be overcome. Not everything is meant to be embraced as identity. And that's an important thing that I want you to remember today. And I started to touch on this last week, but I want to make sure that natural tendencies that we have from whenever we are born are that of selfishness. Right? I gave the example last week that if you go down the hallway and you go into sunlight, what you can find is you can find on any given day kids fighting over a toy, kids fighting over whatever. Like that's something that we need to overcome. But that's just one thing. Some of us have to overcome big ears, right? Like that's where we are. And we need to be able to discern the difference of the things that we're supposed to change and the things that we aren't. Because if we're not careful about this, we'll take something that happens or take something that we see, something that we experience, and we will allow that to turn us into something that we were not intended to be. Now, throughout history, I'm going to give you two examples here from the last couple hundred years that I think are real examples of this. I need my youngsters to help me out. Owen, I might need your help on this. Have you ever heard of Helen Keller? Tell me what you know about her. She was blind and deaf. And then what happened? Anna, you ready to bail Owen out? Do you know how Helen Keller? Then somebody worked with her, right? This is where you research, folks. This is where you. But Helen Keller, somebody born with obvious limitations, and did she overcome them? Why do we know the name today? We know the name because she overcame the limitations. 125 years ago, there's a presidential candidate. His name was Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt grew up as a sickly child, rarely got out of bed, had asthma, had all sorts of things that in the day limited him. But what he didn't do is he did not take that as a limitation. He ended up lifting weights. He ended up doing all these things. He went out west. He became this wild adventurer, and he eventually would become president of the United States. There were some things that he had in his life that could have been seen as a limitation and could have defined his identity, but because he pushed back on those things, we identify him in a different way. I heard a story years ago of a boy, and I need the medical people in the room to be able to help me out on this. He was a boy. He had several brothers. He was one of the youngest. And he thought one day it would be a good idea to play with matches in the garage. Now, I don't know what you keep in the garage, but in this particular garage that this young man grew up in, there was a can of gasoline. And when he was playing with the matches, he somehow caught the can of gasoline set it on fire, and the thing explodes. 7-year-old boy, burnt head to toe. He's screaming in pain. His older brother comes out, sees his brother engulfed in flames, gets a blanket over him, smothers it, puts him out. The boy is taken to the hospital. The boy has severe burns. Now, he has burns over 98% of his body. Now, medical people, check me on this. I am told this is how you calculate the risk for burns. You take the percentage of the body that has been burnt, 98%, you add the age, and that gives you the mortality rate, how likely you are to die. 98% plus 7 years old says that he has a 105% chance of dying. Boy's in the hospital bed. His mother comes in and sees him. His mother gave him permission to die. She was just heartbroken seeing her son and that horrible. He was burnt so much he no longer had fingers burnt his fingers off. But the boy didn't give up. One day, the doctor comes in, sits down on the bed, and says to the boy, he said, I realize you got some things going here, and I want you to know that you may never be able to swing a hammer, but that will not prevent you from building homes. You can be a general contractor and you don't have to swing the hammer. You just get other people to do it, right? Like he was telling them what his life could be like. And every night there was a janitor that came in and looked at this little boy, burnt head to toe. And he just said, you'll walk again. You'll walk again. You'll walk again. And one day, he did. One day, that boy got up and he walked. That boy's limitation was absolutely real. But what I want you to take from that story is that the limitation was real, but it was not ultimate. It was not the destination. The limitation was there because it needed to be overcome. It did not define who he was. In many ways, the limitations that we encounter become part of what shapes us. If you would, turn with me to Ephesians chapter 2. Going to look at verse 10. Paul writes to the church in Ephesus, he says, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Now, Sister Terry says that she likes a different translation of that says not handiwork, but masterpiece. You're God's masterpiece. He was having a good day when he made you. You are his workmanship. You are not random. You were authored. You were created for something. And part of that creation is you were created for something, and part of that you were created to overcome something. And those things that you were, if you were created for those things, it's because God in his all-knowing nature, he knows what those hurdles are that you need to overcome. Your challenges were prepared in advance for you as well. God is not reacting to your life. He's not adjusting on the fly. Now, it may feel that way. That may reflect what your prayers are like sometimes. I know that's me. God, where did this mess come from? How did I end up here, right? But I want you to at least consider that the challenges that you face, God had prescribed those for you. Now let's come back to our framework. If identity comes first, then your identity is not something that you earned. It's something that God decided for you. And so when we have that, when we know that God decided who we are, we need to recognize that there's a difference between design and circumstances. Design is who God made you to be, and circumstances are what design gets, or circumstances are where that design gets formed. God made you to be a particular way, but you're going to go through some things, and as you go through those things, that's going to bring out that design. It's going to make it more obvious. But There's times that as we're going through those things, we get confused and we let those circumstances redefine the design. I have language here, and I don't know that I'm completely comfortable with it, but I'll say this, and we may have to wrestle through this so as we go forward here. Not everything that happens to you is from God, but nothing that comes to you is wasted by God. There are some pretty nasty things that come up, but I am hard pressed to say, oh, well, yeah, God wanted me to go through that. I just, I'm not there yet. And I know that there's some nasty things that people have gone through. I know there's nasty things that people are going through right now. I know that because I've looked in the mirror, right? Like there's a Romans 8:28 tells us that we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Now, in this verse, it doesn't say that all things are good. Some things are not good. If I hadn't given up meatloaf jokes a while ago, this may be a place to insert one. Giving those up, you can insert that yourself, right? But there's some things that we go through in life that are painful. There's some things we go through in life that are wrong. There's some things that should not have happened. And what Paul tells us in his letter to the Romans is that God works all things together for good. So that means that there will be some things in our life that are not good, at least by our standard, right? But there's nothing that happens in your life that is outside God's ability to use. There's nothing outside of that. And there's other times when the issue is not just what we've experienced, but there's what we've come to believe about ourselves because of some experience. Now, I'm watching basketball games till late at night right now. Love basketball, playoffs, tournaments, stuff like that. I'm in, right? That's what I'm doing. Now, one of the arts, or one of the skills of the game of basketball is something that players refer to as trash talking. Perhaps you have heard of such a thing, where one player will give insults or will say something. They use the expression "trying to get in someone's head," where they say, "Hey, you aren't very good." They may say something about somebody's mother. There's very little that's off limits whenever there's trash talking happening. But what do you try to? You try to plant a seed that will negatively impact their performance. Oh, you missed another one. You missed another one. Must not be your night, right? And I actually now, well, that's that. I won't tell that story. That's too far. We're too short on time. But like there's some people. There's a story out there about a player that Jess, maybe you can help me with this. There was a player that allegedly Michael Jordan gave some trash talk to, and after that happened, that player was never the same. I want to say it was Muggsy Bogues, but there was somebody that, like, his career was crippled after being told something, right? There's sometimes that things happen to us that all of a sudden we believe. We're not going to unpack all this today. This is big. This is a big topic. We're going to come back to this. But so I just want you to hold on to that idea for that perhaps Perhaps there's something that you have experienced that you are holding on to that is negatively impacting your identity. And it's not true. It's not who God said you are. Last week, we looked at the story of Joseph. And one of the things we said is that Joseph never let what happened to him redefine who he was. If you read Joseph's story very casually, it looks like a pretty wild time. There's a lot of chaos in his life, right? He has this dream. He ends up being betrayed. He's sold into slavery. He's betrayed again. He is put into prison. He said, hey, remember me. He's forgotten about, and somehow he ends up in the palace. Wild story, right? But if we read it through these filters of Genesis 1:26 through 28, if we read it through the filter of what David tells us in the Psalms, if we look through the filter of what Paul tells us about our identity, then what we have is, when we look at the story of Joseph, we see a young man being designed and developed. Now, are there better ways of being developed than to be sold into slavery? Personally, I hope so. That's a selfish statement for myself, right? But I hope there's some easier ways for some of this stuff. But we see when we understand these elements, when we understand how God works within our identity, what we see is that Joseph's experience is all about formation. Bless you. Joseph was given a dream. And in that dream, remember, there's the stars and there's the wheat, and they're bowing down and they're doing those different things. All Joseph had was a fragment of an idea of who he was supposed to be. Fragment of an idea. And he shared that. And then after that, he was betrayed, and the formation begins. He goes through, it's sort of like when you want to get into shape and you got to go through some pretty tough workouts. I don't really know what that's like, but from what people tell me, from what people say, you go through some of that. There's some formation that's happening as you go through that. What Joseph went through was not a contradiction to what God said about him. Now, it may seem to us like it could be. In the moment, it may seem that way, but we have to adopt a different perspective when it comes to identity. Joseph sold into slavery. And when he finds himself as a slave, what he actually finds is he finds himself in an environment perfectly suited for him to develop. He ends up in prison. What's he end up doing? He ends up running the prison, right? He's in another environment to help him develop. And eventually he ends up in the palace. Nothing in Joseph's life added to his identity, but everything in Joseph's life revealed and shaped his identity. And I realize that words have meanings, right? And so do not miss just how this is. What Joseph went through did not add to the identity that God prescribed for him. But what he went through revealed it, brought it out of him. And when we get to the end of Genesis chapter 50, Joseph understands this. And when his brothers were in the room and they were nervous, he said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. He understood that. He had that perspective. I pray that we can all say those words at some point in our lives. The stuff that we went through, Maybe somebody else intended evil to us. God's going to use it for good. I want to encourage you to, at least for right now, consider embracing that thought for yourself. It may be hard. It may be hard, but I want to encourage you to consider that. But note that Joseph didn't call evil good, but he recognized that God was using it for good. A couple of things here as we wrap up today. God doesn't create accidentally. He does not create accidentally. And because of that, you were designed. You are not some mismatch of parts randomly assembled. Nothing about you is casual to God. And while there may be some things that God allows to come in your life, know that nothing that comes into your life God will waste. He will use it all. And as you go through your journey in life, and you go through the challenges and the hardships and the trials and the tribulations, understand that this is helping to form and reveal your identity. I started off asking you if there was something in your life that you could change. If you could go back in time, if you could change something, if you could get rid of an experience, if you could change the way you look, if you could do whatever, way you think. What if we changed how we thought about that to say, why did this happen? And actually take it a step further. What if this happened that God could be forming something in me? Now that's a very mature question to wrestle with. Like I get that. I'm typically not there. Typically I am not there. But I want you to consider that there may have been something that previously in your life that you may look at as a mistake or regret, some type of hardship, and I want you to instead consider reframing that to how is God forming me through this? How is God forming me through this? So this week, I want to invite you to stay dialed in on your identity. And throughout the week, there's going to be things that come to mind. There's going to be thoughts that come to mind. There's going to be things that you say to yourself. And I don't know about you, but I can be rather ruthless when I talk to myself. I talk worse to myself than I talk to anybody else, which is saying something to some of the people that I've met, right? You know. When those thoughts, when those things come to your mind, I want you to catch yourself. You may say, I wish this wasn't part of my story. But I want you to take the pause when those thoughts come to mind, and I want you to say a quick prayer. I want you to pray, God, how are you using this? I think I've told you this before. There's a principle, and I think I did a whole lesson on this several months ago, but it was on anchoring. Like there's the story of Pavlov's dogs. Anybody remember the story of Pavlov's dogs? That there was a bell, and then when the bell would happen, they would release a treat, and the dogs would salivate. And eventually, what would happen is they could ring the bell, and the dogs would salivate even when they didn't get the treat, right? But what I found is that there's places that I walked in my house, and for me, it was when I walked in the basement and I got to the last step. There was something that I would say to myself, and what I would say to myself when I got to that bottom step is I would say to myself, "I am not well." That's what I would say to myself. And I realized that was not serving me well. But I had anchored that to that position. I had anchored. And so now I would have to change that thought. There's, this is be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I had to say, whenever I started to think that thought, I had to stop it. But my guess is that you probably have some things in your life that are not dissimilar. There's a doorway that you walk through. There's a picture that you see. There's something that happens in your life that whenever you think it, maybe you think something that may not be all that positive. The phone rings, the caller ID says, and you know who it is. You know who's on there. And your thought is, right? What if you said, God, how are you using this? How are you using this? You see, when we do that, that shifts us more in this direction. That moves us from an event and a performance to God, who am I really, right? This shifts us from resistance to awareness. Next week, we are going to continue our study on identity. We might even make it to Genesis chapter 2. I don't know. Depends on how excited we get. We were talking about identity, but something that's going to be mixed with identity is going to be your purpose. And there's many folks that don't know their purpose. And I shared with you before, if you don't know your purpose, I do. At least I know what it is right now. If you don't know what your purpose right now is to find your purpose. We're going to start to weave that in here in the weeks to come. So I'm going to hit stop. Maybe I'm going to hit stop on this.